I was working with the people who were designing the next version of Gmail. And, I found myself in the room with, the designers who manage this interface where people, you go to any internet cafe back before COVID, and you see almost every laptop has this like Gmail page open, right? Almost everywhere.
Oh yeah,
People,
we all know it. Sure.
we all know
Yeah.
it. Like people live in this space. It's a habitat. It's not just a product we use. It's a space we live and we work in. And given that importance, I thought to myself, as we're designing the next version of this is an opportunity to really think about how this is an enormous source of stress in people's lives. It's funny because I think one of the responses to the film, when I say in the film that I'm really addicted to my email, a lot of people don't understand that because email is sort of just junk mail for a lot of people. But coming from, I think, the generation that you came from and that I came from, email is a central place where, especially at the time, every now and then I would be getting, big introductions to people who would help us advance the work. So it became my own slot machine to check, did Daniel Kahneman, the head of, the founder of behavioral economics, email me and that kind of thing. But that said, I was thinking about, is Gmail really good for people? I was thinking about, this is a pretty addictive, stressful place in people's lives. Could we reduce social expectations? Could you make it so that when you send an email, you could say, hey, I actually don't need a response for 2 weeks? Could we start to implement features that would reduce the addictiveness? And, there I am in the room, and there's no other room in the world besides that Gmail design team room. And if there was the room where it happened, and I thought if there was any room where people would care about this would be the one. And I found, to no disparagement of my colleagues who were working at the time, I just didn't find the conversation really as thoughtful as it needed to be, given the consequences that we were having for like 6 hours or 4 hours of people's days.
So first, how many people were in that room?
Good question. I think probably somewhere between 6 to 10 people usually in those rooms.
Okay. How long were you at Google before this discussion is happening?
So within about 3 months, we had joined the Gmail team and we're starting to have those conversations. So 3 to 4 months I was in there.
And then you sent out a now legendary deck around, hey, we should probably be thinking more deeply about the choices we're making because they're about to influence billions of people over time. Was that just months after you joined Google?
Yeah, that was in January of 1 year in. So it's basically 1 year into being at Google after trying to make it work with the Gmail team. I really wanted to see us ship something that would make a dramatic positive impact on people's mental health around email and stress and notifications and attention. And because it wasn't going anywhere, and because overall, like other apps, whether it was Quora or Path or all the, Instagram at the time, which was just, blowing up, I was just disappointed in where are we as a tech industry heading? Like where have we lost our moral compass? Do we really care about what we're building and how it's impacting people? Or have we kind of forgotten, that there's more to just capturing lots of attention and getting virality? And so I started, I went on a trip to the Santa Cruz Mountains with my one of my best friends, Asa Raskin, who his father, Jeff Raskin, invented the Macintosh project at Apple. And that's where we get our name in Humane for the Center for Humane Technology. Asa's father, Jeff, wrote a classic book called The Humane Interface, which is the foundation of some of our work. But Asa and I were in the Santa Cruz Mountains and, connecting with nature and just being out there. And it just really struck me that I needed to go back and there needed to be something that was said about this. And the words came to me in that trip. And it was never before in history have a handful of technology designers who mostly look like, hipster engineers in San Francisco between 25, 35 years old, mostly men, mostly white, making decisions on behalf of 1 billion people was the number at the time. Now it's 3 billion people, to show you the growth rate of how fast these things go. And the presentation included just a bunch of examples. You can actually find it online on minimizedistraction.com, I think is where someone had leaked it and posted it. But it used a bunch of examples of how technology's tapping into our psychological vulnerabilities and the cost that it was having on kids, on mental health. And it ended up going viral. I sent it to a few people for feedback. And instead of the 10 people I sent it to exclusively, I came to work the next day and I had like 100 emails about it. So I knew it had gone viral to many more people. And as the film, The Social Dilemma says, it went up to Larry Page's office in several different meetings that day. And I think it created a moment of reckoning where we actually said, hey, can we do something about this? And I would host follow-on lunches at Google, bringing people together from different teams to talk about it. But it was just hard to get a real coordinated action because the external global pressure from consumers or from the world or from governments just wasn't there. And that's what's astonishing is to see where it is now, because compared to, lunchroom meetings that I would book at a random part of the Google campus with, 12 people showing up saying, how do we fix this? To today, where you have, I think, something like 30 to 40 million people are going to have seen this film very soon in 190 countries. It feels like it's taken 8 years to get to a point where we're going to be able to meaningfully change these incentives.
So this is 2012 that you send this deck out and then it goes viral at Google?
Yeah, 2012 to 2013, somewhere around there. End of 2012, early 2013.
All right, let's call it early 2013 then. So when you send this deck out to your 10 contacts, were you concerned at all that this is going to make you seem like someone who is not on board with like the like the general direction of development of the project you're on? I mean, you're relatively new to the company. It's an enormous company, and the rest of it. Like, is there any concern that this is going to be bad for your career?
Yeah, I'm glad you're bringing this up because it's easy to skim past this now. I actually had no idea how people were going to respond. I was prepared that if I had gotten fired for some reason because of it, that I would be okay with that. So I had pre-committed that was an okay thing, an okay outcome for me. And I was, I was actually really afraid to send it out, which is why it was surprised me when so many people, when it shared virally. I mean, on Google Slides, you can click on a presentation and it shows you in the top right-hand corner how many simultaneous viewers there are. And there was something like 150, and then later that day, like 400 simultaneous viewers, for, in a 10,000, whatever it was, 20,000 person company back then. So I did not expect to be, I'd never been in my life a person who went against the grain, who was highly disagreeable, who was trying to challenge things. I wasn't outspoken. It just struck me that no one was sufficiently paying attention to this, and it was too important not to.
So then it sounds like the feedback was by and large quite positive, so much so that they actually give you this new title and role saying, you're going to be our new design ethicist. You're going to tell us what's what. So how was that transition and role, and how long were you in that role?
Yeah, so this is important. There was a fellow at the Google Creative Lab in New York who had actually helped co-write, to make the story all circular. He helped co-write the first Macintosh, the famous Macintosh Super Bowl ad. If you remember the woman running down the streets and throwing the hammer and smashing the Big Brother screen, he had co-written that advertisement. And he had seen this presentation at Google and was really impressed by it. We connected on this book that had really shaped him by Neil Postman called Amusing Ourselves to Death, which is really, I think, entirely descriptive of exactly everything that's going wrong right now, that culture and our society would surrender to the forces of technology, and technology would start to subsume culture and remake culture in its image. And that we would be caught in this kind of race, not for attention, he didn't express it that way, but this race to make things amenable to how technology would want to see and shape the world. Metrics like, in this case, he was talking about SAT scores and predictive analytics for college admissions and things like that. But he didn't at the time know about, a few years later, we'd have tech companies running by the metrics of time spent and engagement. And that book, Amusing Ourselves to Death, opens with this description that we were all watching out for the year 1984, when the form of dystopia and tyranny in the form of Big Brother and the Orwellian vision of dystopia would come to, subsume society. And then luckily it didn't come to pass. We made it through 1984 and that didn't happen. But he says that there was always this second vision of dystopia that was the more subtle one that people don't remember as much, which is Aldous Huxley's Brave New World, where the tyranny is not of restricting access to information or censoring what you can or can't think, but instead bludgeoning people with a sea of irrelevance, with so much narcissism and egoism and passivity and informational overwhelm that people wouldn't know what's true, and they'd be amusing themselves to death. And this was the book that this fellow at Google, who offered to host me to work on this problem, and I connected on. And then I started to become, I didn't know what to call it. So we just said, let's call it design ethics. And no one had ever thought, how do you ethically design along the social psychological vulnerabilities of humanity? And it became more of a research project for the first 2 years. And I tried changing various things within Google. We tried talking to the Android team and changing things on Chrome, and how would we make smartphones work differently, and talk to the App Store teams about changing incentives. But I couldn't get anywhere. And so about 3 years later, I decided to leave. And soon after that, I was on the Sam Harris podcast, where you and I think, both launched our careers in a certain sense. And
Sam
you and I
Harris, thank you.
Thanks to Sam. That podcast was the kind of coming out moment for this work. And Chris Anderson, who runs TED, emailed me a few days later, which was, I think, only 3 days before the TED conference, and said, I need to get you to come to TED to do a TED Talk on what you just shared on Sam's podcast. And I was actually about to fly to Czech Republic with my mother, who was dying at the time. And this was the last time that we were going to take a trip abroad. And I decided to go, but then cut my trip short, go to TED, had 2 days to prepare this first TED Talk on how technology controls a billion minds. And that's where I met you. And I remember the moment it happened at the buffet table, I think, on that Friday. Yeah, that was, it's a long time ago now.
Well, I did not know what the run up was too. For me, I was just blown away by your talk and was like, that was incredible. It's like, so hearing, I didn't know about Sam, and certainly not, you're abbreviating your trip with your mom. So when you decide to leave Google, here's the thing. Google, famous for its food, famous for all this stuff. You're hanging out there. You've got this design ethicist job, and you're like, hey, Android, try and do something better. Hey, Chrome, everyone, try and do something better. And you realize you're not making headway. I still feel like 99% of people would have been like, just stay there forever, do your thing, because you're in corporate womb. People respect you. You're still in the mothership. So it feels like a big decision to be like, all right, this is not working. It's time for me to go. Particularly when you decided to leave, it didn't seem like it was clear what the next steps would be.
It's so interesting, Andrew. I really appreciate you asking these questions. That's exactly right. I did not at all feel clear. Leave and go do what? How you're inside of the biggest, most influential company in the world. That is probably one of the biggest surface areas for these problems showing up, which is all of Android, which actually has a majority of smartphone users around the world. In the US, obviously, it's more iPhone skewed. Why in the world would you leave that environment and obviously be paid? I think Nicholas Nassim Taleb wrote the line that the three most addictive things in the world are cocaine, heroin, and a monthly paycheck. It's very hard to walk away from, monthly security, job security. And I really didn't know how we would ever change these problems. I remember feeling deep anxiety about what it would mean to leave and live off my savings, frankly, and figure out how in the world, what do you do to sort of get people to care about something in a public stage? And there was about a year and a half after that where nothing happened. And it was when I think Trump got elected and the election took place and the conversation started happening about Russian manipulation of the elections. And I had seen certain things like this myself and had been part of a community of researchers who'd been tracking some of those manipulations, that I decided I had to jump in full steam into this problem, even if I didn't know how I would get the attention it deserved.
Thank you for listening in. I hope you enjoyed this conversation. If you did, please do subscribe to Yang Speaks and click on notifications so we can let you know every time we have a new episode.